Rolex and Casio, both OG watchmakers, both loved. Rolex sometimes hated, to be fair, but mostly loved and desired. The one affordable, the other expensive or even unattainable for many. But who has the best GMT, the best travel watch? Is it the two-tone Rolex Rootbeer or the BMW B5000 GD-4 that is best? Let's dive in. Elephant number one in the room. The fact is you don't have to choose when it comes to these two watches, and that is to a large extent due to the Casio G-Shock. Casio watches are affordable in a way that very few other good watches are. So you can easily buy a Rolex, assuming you can get one at retail, and have a G-Shock as well. But assuming you have to choose one, which one do you go for? The Rolex Rootbeer is a $10,000 watch in the classic Rolex Oyster case. 40 millimeters in diameter, two-tone Everose with an oyster bracelet and the signature Rootbeer ceramic GMT bezel and an in-house GMT function. It has a black dial, applied markers, Everose gold plots, Mercedes hands and pointer GMT. You set the time and GMT function via the crown, moving all the hands or the hour hand on its own. 70 hours of power reserve, plus minus 2 second accuracy, anti-magnetic properties and water resistance up or down to 100 meters. The clasp is the Easy Link with 5 millimeters of adjustment. It's the slightly more upscale version of the Pepsi and the Batman, which are the entry-level full steel versions which are available on Oyster or Jubilee bracelets. Personally, this is the GMT I prefer out of the three Rolexes, precisely because of the two-tone, precisely because of the Rootbeer colorway. This watch screams style, and I honestly think it's more versatile than the blue-red combo and more eye-catching than the Batman. It's not often that I prefer two-tone, but this one is fire. As for the overall design, it's the classic Oyster case, which has been refined to almost perfection. Rolex makes small iterational adjustments from time to time on the case, this one being one of the good ones with really strong proportions. Anybody can wear this watch, and chances are anyone that can afford one would want to. The key feature of this watch, of course, is the GMT function. You have the option to show home time, travel time, plus a third time zone using the rotating bezel. As with pretty much all Rolexes except maybe the Yachtmaster 2, it sits exceptionally well on pretty much any wrist and looks like $1 million. You have to get a little used to how the gold is a real scratch magnet, but overall I think it adds to the charm of the model, which is not cheap at around $17,000, but it is really, really well made. The G-Shock is a digital quartz watch with a 49mm by 43mm case in DLC rose gold or yellow gold if you want that. Casio watches are exceptionally pointless to size. You have to wear them to know if they work on your wrist. Having said that, these GMW steel versions are noticeably larger than the resin model, sitting higher and broad on the wrist. Adding the relatively inflexible and flared steel bracelet end links further enlarges the watch. The bracelet does flare downwards and follows the curvature of your wrist, which makes for a slightly smaller wearing experience that you would expect. Compared to the steel Casios, this watch wears significantly better on most wrists, mainly because the dial of this watch is wide but not tall, where the Casio is both. Nevertheless, Casio watches, even their big watches, can be exceptionally wearable. This model is no exception. Personally, I think it wears amazingly. The finishing is really good. You can feel that the bracelet is stamped. It has that, jingly jangly sound that screams cheap bracelet, but once it's on the wrist, you don't really notice. It's a reasonably heavy watch, which actually helps in communicating a premium or quality feel. The watch is solar powered, which I think should be standard in any Casio you buy. It has a Bluetooth connection for easy settings adjustment, a stopwatch, a timer, and of course a world timer with 5 user-defined world locations. The display is easily legible and even has an illumination light, which isn't great, but it works better than you would expect, and you can definitely see what's going on the dial. The DLC coating is convincing, and compared to a lot of cheap mall watches, you do actually find yourself thinking, is this real gold? More than you would looking at least at your run-of-the-mill wall watch. Although it's gold and digital, it's surprisingly restrained, at least in the rose gold version. It doesn't come across as blingy as you might expect. It attracts attention, but in a good way. So which one is best? Obviously, arguing for or against two models in such clearly different segments is not only frivolous, but also kind of pointless. But then again, I don't think you could define one as a clear winner over the other. Yes, the materials and the finishing on the Rolex are way better. The ruggedness of the G-Shock is superior. Yes, the quartz module is more feature-rich and more accurate than the Rolex. Yes, the G-Shock is solar-powered. The G-Shock is more affordable. The Rolex feels more premium. The thing I've come to realize comparing these two watches is not so much that there could be a clear winner, but rather how they rather convincingly and surprisingly are able to compete with each other on a number of key characteristics. Consider the finishing on the Rolex. It's the best. But the G-Shock has what I think is an excellent DLC coating, and the look is sleek, luxurious, bold, and dare I say it, quite classy. I can see the G-Shock working really well under a suit shirt and totally fitting the part. Rolex isn't a winner by a mile, and it doesn't take as decisive a victory as you might think. What about street cred? The Rolex will get you robbed for sure in a major metropolitan city. The G-Shock most likely not, but go to any watch collector get-together and the G-Shock will get significantly more attention than Rolex. Rolex is mainstream, it's passé. It's the obvious choice and sends no signal of your watch-loving credentials. Also, the G-Shock to some extent sends a signal that you don't give a crap about what other people think. You want to rock a rose gold G-Shock? Well, then you're going to rock a rose gold G-Shock. People may think, is he rich? Is he cool? Is he a watch nerd? The Rolex? Best case, regular folks will think you're a poser. Even for non-watch people, the G-Shock comes across as a more esoteric choice. This model is not a toy watch and not your classic GW9400. It tries to be something else and actually gets away with it to a large extent. Travel functionality. The G-Shock is easier to read. You can have 6 time zones coded in, and by hitting the top left and top right button, you can switch between the world time in the top right box and home time on the main screen, or you can have them swapped. The Rolex, you have to remember to think in 24 hours, remember which one you set at home time and world time, and don't tell me everyone uses the home and travel times in the same way. People don't. People interpret and use the hands differently, and it's not complex algebra, but remembering which is what and what is 22 and what is day and night is not as simple as the G-Shock. On the other hand, if you've ever used the G-Shock, you'll know the joy of pushing a teeny tiny squishy button with your fingernail experience, hoping it will result in a response. It's a niggle, a small one, but you get over it. Overall, the real-world timer function is just better on the G-Shock, if not necessarily aesthetically superior. Ruggedness, you say? Clearly, that's the G-Shock by a mile. Well, no. The G-Shock metal models are scratch magnets, and although the DLC coating is tough, it isn't indestructible. The Rolex will also attract scratches, but it's anti-magnetic, it's got a solid steel case with anti-shock properties. It can handle its own and can take a beating if you want it to. It's after all meant to be worn, not to be babied. Cerachrome is relatively speaking still a reasonably new thing, and you're not going to get the bakelite bezels of yore with all the patina, but I suspect a beat-up Rootbeer with a Cerachrome bezel will look very cool in 25 years' time. Aesthetics. Rolex makes beautiful watches, but again, it's not a clear winner. Some G-Shocks are, let's say, more often than not, built for purpose, and less so with considerations about symmetry, aesthetic attractiveness, or objective, if there is such a thing, beauty. But this G-Shock, the square in DLC steel, is good looking. You can't deny it, it just is. They aren't the same. The Rolex is the Porsche, the G-Shock is the Jeep. They both have their own beauty though. Which brings me to this. I wanted to illustrate a point. The point isn't beauty is in the eye of the beholder, that's a given. The point is that in the world of watches and going down that rabbit hole, you at some point realize that price, specifications, functionality, materials, finishing are not a linear concept. Better materials, better finishing, better specifications do not by definition a superior watch make. Also, 2 watches in markedly different price points can still be alternatives to each other and competitors. You wouldn't see a Fiat Panda as a competitor to a Mercedes E-Class station car, but the G-Shock can compete with a Rolex GMT on some level. Of course, you could boil my argument down to personal preference as well, but I think there's more to it than that. To me, it's the fact that all the combinations of elements that go into the watch become a sum total that make up more than its individual components. The G-Shock isn't just one watch in a segment and the Rolex one watch in another segment. They are alternatives, they're competitors, at least for those that care about the details, the idiosyncrasies and the totality of the wearing experience. They're a tough choice for those that care. It's not clear-cut. We can't pick an objective winner. There is no best watch in the world. That's what makes watches fun. And that's why when you look at your watch roll, you look every morning and it's like, am I going to wear the G-Shock today or the Rootbeer? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.